All right, hello, and welcome back to another episode of Star Wars Mark of Balance. My name is Mark, and today we're going to be talking about Ahsoka Part VII, the penultimate episode, Dreams and Nightmares. Sorry, Dreams and Madness. My bad. I thought Dave Filoni was a big Meek Mill fan. I thought Thrawn was going to come back to the galaxy blasting Dreams and Nightmares, and that was going to be his walkout music. And to be honest, the galaxy would be defeated in that moment if he came out to Dreams and Nightmares, just being honest. So this episode for me was one of the weakest of the season by far. I think above all, it felt the most rushed, and it slipped into a lot of problems in the writing department that I feel have plagued the other Star Wars Disney Plus shows. And I think that's because it put action and convenience above substance and consequential writing. And I think this held true throughout the episode across the board for every character, maybe not all. I think there were some good parts of this episode. I thought Thrawn and Ezra, both their characters were very strong in this episode. But I think in the end, this episode just did not live up to the momentum that was being built in the previous weeks, especially going into the finale of a show that may only be one season. So I mentioned the writing in the intro, and I'm just going to dive in right here into the first scene, which I think was a great example of subpar writing and storytelling that I think is apparent throughout the episode. And I'm probably going to be the only one that spends this much time on this opening scene, but I really do think it sets the stage for the quality of writing that we get for the rest of the episode. And they really tried their best to make me not notice it, and they tried to distract me by putting my Queen Mon Mothma right front and center at the beginning of the scene. And admittedly, it did work for a couple seconds, but then as the scene went on, it snapped me out of it, and the poor writing just got through to me. So the premise of this scene is this military tribunal is trying Hera for disobeying direct orders. And the central focus of the scene relies on the tension that they already established between Hera and Senator Xiono. Now, earlier in the season, Senator Xiono's skepticism was well-founded. At that point, Hera and Ahsoka had only found small Imperial sympathizers on their shipyard in Corellia. And that was really what they were going off of. It still felt like a wild goose chase, and you could empathize with him. You could see where he was coming from, even though we know that Hera's intentions were true and good. So while we didn't like him, and it's okay to have characters we're not supposed to like, you at least have to make them round. You can't make them flat characters. And that's exactly what Senator Xiono became in this scene. There's no real logic written into his character in this scene, and some of the lines he uses simply contradict what we've seen in the story and what we know to be true. So his sole purpose in the scene moves away from him being a living, breathing character, and he just becomes a cartoonish asshole that is a opposing force to Hera, and a talking head to inject tension or conflict into a scene when it's unfounded. So let's just take a step back and take all of these events at face value and think about them objectively, kind of like what Mon Mothma says when she says, we have to at least acknowledge that there was an incident. There were Imperial sympathizers on Corellia. They were building parts for a hyperspace ring that had the alleged ability to jump between galaxies. Dark Jedi were able to infiltrate and break out Morgan Elsbeth, who is a high-value Imperial prisoner. All those things together do not automatically confirm that Thrawn is coming back. I agree. Yes. So I think everyone can acknowledge that something is going on with the Imperial Remnant. Does it automatically mean that this Thrawn talk is true and has merit? No. But the implication from this senator is that Hera was doing nothing of importance, and she was siphoning resources away from the fledgling New Republic just to save her friends, which objectively makes no sense at this point. We've seen that something is going on, and all of this is not just for fun. These people aren't just building a hyperspace ring, and these Dark Jedi are not just random mercenaries that shouldn't be dealt with and aren't a threat to the New Republic. And he continually points out how these resources can be used better, but never does the script give him anything to work with by saying, this happened because you siphoned resources away. This city was ransacked by marauders because your fleet wasn't in the right position, or because you weren't at command of your fleet. So your feelings got ahead of the New Republic. So even though you think you're doing the good thing, this bad thing happened because you were out on your own, doing your own thing. Would that make him a much more compelling character and make me at least understand where he's coming from? Yes. That is a good conflict both internally for Hera and externally. She has to face the consequences of her following her friendships, but also realizing that she let other people down. Doesn't that sound so much more compelling than this guy just spouting nonsense? Then Trapper Wolf gets up and is like, what about Moff Gideon on Mandalore? And Senator Xiono, once again, is so worried about New Republic safety, but when it comes to warlords building an entire Beskar army with an entire base built on this dead planet, he then just doesn't care about it. All of these different Imperial warlords, just because they don't have a central command, doesn't mean they're not a threat to the New Republic. In the books, in Alphabet Squadron, we know that Hera is a part of plenty of missions that are hunting down Imperial remnants because they know that they're a threat to the New Republic. That's what the standing military is for. That's what the fleet is for. And my favorite part of the scene, which was the worst written part, is when he says, yeah, I read your report. It's like a childhood fairy tale. Star whales, dark Jedi, risen Jedi, star maps, different galaxies. What? Do you want to go down that list and talk about the recorded examples of all of those things being very, very real? Star whales? Oh, you mean the Purgle that literally saved the entire planet of Lothal because they jettisoned an entire Star Destroyer away from the planet in front of an entire population of a city? Was that not documented? Do we not know that this is possible? Dark Jedi? Oh, you mean the Dark Jedi that were literally caught on recording breaking into a New Republic cruiser and rescuing Morgan Elsbeth? Risen Jedi? Oh, you mean like Ahsoka and Sabine, the people that literally built the rebellion before you were even a part of the rebellion? Those known Jedi? Yeah. Star maps? Oh, I don't know. Star Wars. That's crazy. I've never heard of a star map in Star Wars. Like, really, dude? Other galaxies? Yeah, I think science is advanced to realize that your galaxy isn't the only galaxy. So everything he mentions in that entire list makes zero sense as to why that would come off as a childhood story to someone that lives in the Star Wars galaxy, and we have documented evidence of all of these things being true and real. It's so much different than in the original trilogy when they talk about Jedi as these mystical beings that may or may not have existed. It was literally 10, 15 years of seeing no Jedi and never coming in contact with someone with a lightsaber. Like, you can understand why people wouldn't know that these things are real. But all of these things we talk about here have happened and have been seen and talked about. Eyewitness accounts of the Purgle leaving the planet and jumping to hyperspace. All of Hera's fleet is there watching them do it. They literally lost a bunch of X-Wings because this hyperspace ring literally jumped to another galaxy. We have evidence of bad things happening. And these childhood stories that he's talking about, they're all real. All of it happened. So he's just like written to be this illogical character. And now I'm really fired up about it because it's so stupid. But he's written to be so dumb in this scene. And it's only to move the plot along, or at least create artificial conflict here and set the stage for Leia and C-3PO to make a welcome entrance, which I liked. I liked their cameo here. But if you really want to see why the New Republic is incompetent, read Star Wars Bloodlines, which follows Leia's perspective in the New Republic Senate. And you see how the First Order rises from the New Republic. It's so good. It's so well written. The conflict makes sense. The story has teeth. It has nuance. It's so good compared to this very flat interpretation of what the New Republic is. And with that, I am done talking about this scene. I can't believe I just spent 10 minutes on this, but I think now, even if this scene didn't mean that much to you when you watched it, at least you can understand how bad writing has infected some of these Star Wars episodes. And this is like the biggest example of it. And now I'm going to jump into the rest of the episode, which I think kind of piggybacks onto this scene, which I think is still the worst scene of the episode. But I'm going to talk about a lot of other examples, and I will talk about good things, I promise. Actually, I'm not done. Maybe Senator Xiono next week is revealed to be a Imperial sympathizer, and he wants Thrawn to come back. So he wants all of the people to not focus on Thrawn coming back. Maybe that's the direction. But I think he's in Star Wars Resistance as a senator in the New Republic. So that theory doesn't really make sense because it doesn't seem like he's a turncoat or a spy. So regardless, this is dumb. I don't care what happens next week with this character. I feel bad for the actor. The actor was given terrible material. Okay, so to the rest of the episode. Ahsoka and Hu Yang show up in the new galaxy, and the Purgle literally jump right into a minefield. And I think this is the last time we see the Purgle, because at this point, they're just like, you know what, Ezra, that favor you did for us back in season 3 of Rebels, you know what, that debt's paid. We're done helping you. We got rid of Thrawn and the Star Destroyer, and now you have us flying into a minefield. Like, we're good, we're done. And they jump away. So totally respect and feel like we're not going to see the Purgle for the rest of the show or ever again, because I think they're done with people in this galaxy. So I'm very curious to see how our group gets back to the known galaxy at the end of this season. Maybe they get stranded. Who knows? But we're in the new galaxy, and Thrawn gets the report that Ahsoka is Anakin's Padawan. And I love this reaction from Thrawn where he's like, is this really? She's this guy's Padawan? Oh, I know this guy. I've done some things with this guy. And I like how he kind of breaks it down. He says she's unpredictable, which makes her dangerous, and we have to limit all the variables, and we have to simply let her find her own path. We can't try to control her path because she's unpredictable. So we have to let her find her own path, and when she does that, we can be one step ahead, which I'm still trying to process how, if she's unpredictable, you can be a step ahead of unpredictability, because then that makes you predictable. Again, that might be semantics. Maybe I have to watch the scene again. But I think overall it was a smartly written scene, but it might have sounded more smart than it actually is. But for now, I did like this scene with Thrawn. And I think Thrawn throughout this episode, for the most part, is good. I think he does fall into that Rebels problem that I had with him back in Rebels, because I don't think he could really have teeth in Rebels, not just because it was a kids show, but also because there was so many main characters that it was hard for him to get true victories, because there was a lot of plot armor. And I'm not saying plot armor is not present in the original trilogy or anything like that, but you have to make it seem like the plot armor isn't there. And if you don't do a good job of hiding it, then it's very noticeable. So I do like how they introduced Thrawn's tactical side in this episode. We see he's kind of this overseer of the battlefield. He's a tactician. We get a hint that maybe he expected Ahsoka to arrive, and that's why he sent Sabine off to be this trump card, that if there was a rescue attempt, that Sabine wouldn't be near his base of operations, and that would buy him some time to complete the loading of these coffins, essentially, before they leave the galaxy. And again, at the end of the last episode, it seemed like he was surprised that Ahsoka was alive and that his plan didn't really have her involved in it. So I don't really know who he expected to come for Sabine, if he was so surprised that Ahsoka was alive. And he didn't have a plan for her, because he started asking Morgan Elsbeth, I want to know all these things about Ahsoka. So I'm not really sure how he did that, but I guess it was just, Thrawn always thinking about every single possibility. I don't know. That was kind of shaky for me. Now, I haven't seen too much on the internet, but I'm sure some people felt like Morgan Elsbeth felt like a mouthpiece in this episode, just for Thrawn to spout his plans back at her. Like, she asked these questions like, this doesn't feel like a victory. Wait, how did you know your plan would work? And then he could just explain his entire plan, and it feels like exposition. But Timothy Zahn, the writer of the Thrawn books, was guilty of this. He had so many moments in those books where characters would ask these T-ball questions for Thrawn to just explain his entire plan over 2-3 paragraphs. So some could argue that Dave Filoni should try to improve that writing in this, but I think it's just like a staple of the character of Thrawn. And let's not lie to each other and say we don't like when he explains his plans. We like when he does that. But I know some new people to Thrawn might be like, why are these side characters just like giving him softball questions? That's just what happens with Thrawn. Another thing I didn't really like about Thrawn in this episode, while I do enjoy the overall concept of it, and there were some really good moments with him, the whole thing with Baylon kind of bailing was something that he should have expected, or at least envisioned. I know his ultimate goal was to just stall and buy time for his escape, but he made it pretty clear the first moment or second moment that he met Baylon that he was a Jedi and that he doesn't really trust Jedi, and Jedi have a habit of hiding or disappearing, and that's exactly what Baylon does. And when Baylon disappears and he's like, wait, where's Baylon? He's not a part of the attack right now with Shin. It's something that he should have been expecting. Like, he should have been like, I see Baylon is not here anymore. To be expected of a Jedi. But he kind of just says, like, sarcastic, like, Lord Baylon isn't here. again, acceptable losses for Thrawn, but I just thought that moment, again, could have been done a bit better. So since I brought up Baylon and Shin, I think it's a good time to just jump into their moment in this episode where Baylon basically tells her to, kick rocks, like join the Empire. I'm going on my own way. We're going in opposite directions. And gives her this final piece of advice, like, if you don't have persistence for victory, you ensure defeat, which is cool, but this scene and the writing felt so rushed. I get that last week we had a little bit of the seeds planted that Shin was questioning what Baylon was exactly looking for here. Maybe she was skeptical of him, and maybe he sensed that, and that's why he was just cutting it off early. And they are dark Jedi, so there isn't any love lost between them, but he did say he trained her to be more, so we thought maybe there's another layer to this relationship. And I appreciate that there isn't that much dialogue between them, but this moment just didn't feel very earned. It felt extremely abrupt. And again, I'll make excuses for it by saying Baylon might be close to his ultimate goal, and when the dark side starts to pull you towards your ultimate goal, you stop acting like yourself. And I agree that last week and this week Baylon felt a little different, but I do think the script is somewhat to blame for that, depending on what happens next week. But I did not really like this interaction here. And the thing with their whole part of this story is that these marauders just follow them and like attack. But what's the skin in the game for them? Is it to avenge the fighters that Sabine hurt or killed? Like, okay, that makes sense. Maybe that happened off screen. Maybe I'm being a little nitpicky. But again, these like marauders just attack these people and Ezra and Sabine, and they die, and they fight alongside Shin and Baylon, but we don't know why. There's no compelling case why they would fight alongside them. A scene with Baylon, Shin, and these fighters maybe talking it over, maybe that would go a long way to be like, why are these marauders just like leading the charge and waiting for Baylon and Shin? Why do Baylon and Shin automatically become the leaders of these marauders who have lived on this planet forever, we assume? So I mentioned Ezra and Sabine. Again, Ezra, I think, is my favorite part of the show right now. I think Eman Esfandi is actually my favorite version of the character of Ezra, to be honest, even though he's only been in a couple scenes. I think he not only captures Ezra, but he's a lot more charming, I think, in live action than he was in animation. So I really love his character here. But again, I don't think the interactions between Sabine and Ezra are enough right now. Sabine, every time she opens her mouth, it's complicated. It's complicated. I don't really want to get into it, which was fine last episode because they just got back together. Big hugs. Let's just reconnect. Let's not talk about the bad things. Let's talk about the good things. Let's talk about being together. But I think we all expected this episode to start to dive deeper into what Ezra has been doing. How did he meet these people? What has Sabine been doing? I mean, Sabine has literally been staring at a hologram of this guy for like 10 years. And all she can say to him is, it's complicated. I'm not saying reconnecting with people is easy after a decade, but just give me something emotional here. It just felt so flat. And while their dialogue is funny and quippy, like, we want something deeper. Like, these are characters we really care about. Like, let's really dive into them. And I think this is just like a symptom of this episode feeling rushed. Like, these character moments that we got in the beginning of the season, where it was these slow moments where music told the story. I feel like in this episode, we just breeze right past them in favor of action or getting a joke across. So now we could talk about the action, which I think overall was good. Again, Ezra was my favorite part. I love that he was just doing hand-to-hand combat and using force moves and force techniques in between hand-to-hand and dodging, and just showing that he has this mastery of the force, even though we haven't seen him for 10 years. We can assume that he kept his connection strong, which is a great like subtext that's baked into the scene without having to say that he's continued his Jedi training, which I think is really cool and a really high point of the episode. Again, we see Sabine using her Beskar, her lightsaber, her blasters, which is all cool. Again, something with this season and maybe in previous seasons of Star Wars Disney live action shows, I just wish there was some damage on some of our characters, like a cut, a bruise, a limp. But it seems like every time they just get off without a scratch. Like, Sabine and Ezra just take on this whole group, and it doesn't feel like there's any tension because they never take a hit, and even if they do take a hit, they're fine the next 10 seconds later. This was something that happened in the last episode that I kind of let pass, but because this episode was much weaker, it stands out more to me. Like, Sabine took on that whole group of marauders, and she took some hits. She took some hits to the back of the knee, and she kind of walked it off, and she looks fine. And I just wish they baked in more damage or hurt into our heroes. So at least if we know they're not going to die, at least we feel like there's some tension there or some stakes. Another piece of action we get in this episode is we do get another lightsaber battle, a rematch between Ahsoka and Baylon, which should have been way cooler and way more earned, but instead the rushed script here instead had Ahsoka drop down right next to Baylon, who was just inexplicably brooding in the middle of this open pasture, just sitting there, which, I mean, someone might argue, oh, he's using the Force to sense where he needs to go next, but it's staged so weirdly that he's just sitting there. And Ahsoka and Huyang obviously see that Sabine and Ezra are in trouble. They're entrapped. There's blaster fire. They're surrounded. But instead, Ahsoka decides to get dropped off further away, slides down the ramp right to where Baylon is without giving the audience any indication that she saw that Baylon was there. They literally show from the cockpit that they saw Ezra and Sabine and said, no, instead of landing right next to that or getting dropped off right next to that, we're going to land all the way over here because the script says Baylon and Ahsoka need to fight this episode. So we're going to just conveniently do that. Ahsoka and Baylon fight. Again, great choreography, but you can't just win me over with action and flashy swords. You need to have a script and a plot that makes sense. And this whole interaction made no sense. So they have this quick little fight. I like the way it's shot. It's very samurai-esque on like the grassy plain. Like, it's very cool. It reminded me of Ghost of Tsushima, like Kawasaki, Kurosawa, sorry. And we see that Ahsoka has grown since the last time they met. She doesn't need to defeat him. She just needs to distract him. Huyang comes in. She steals his dog, which she wouldn't have needed to steal his dog if she just went directly to where Ezra and Sabine were, but whatever. That part did piss me off just almost as much as the Senator one in the beginning. But it was just another microcosm of this idea of a rushed script that was just trying to get from point A to point B without connecting the dots very soundly. So the episode ends with the stormtroopers showing up, Ezra and Sabine. They take care of the stormtroopers pretty easily, which I guess is fine, but I was really hoping that Thrawn had engineered better soldiers with the Night Sisters, but instead they're just the same old cannon fodder of stormtroopers with a new coat of paint, which maybe we'll see more of in the future, but again, we only have one more week, so I have no idea. But Ahsoka comes in and saves the day, and Shin is outnumbered, and she runs away, so I'm hoping Shin and Baylon have a kind of epic showdown next week where Shin comes back to him. They have this emotional conversation about him abandoning her, and we hear some of her backstory, and they have this clash, and one of them dies, and we get this emotional conflict that I think would be really earned at this point in the season. Even though I didn't love the way they split up, I think this would still be a really great conflict to have. And the moment with Ahsoka and Ezra seeing each other again was nice. Of course, the last time they saw each other, he saved her in the World Between Worlds. So, that was really nice. We saw Auntie Ahsoka again giving him a big hug, and the crew's back together. And we end with Thrawn kind of saying, well, they lost the one thing they couldn't afford, time. And that's supposed to be taken as a victory, which again feels like a Rebels kind of Thrawn victory, where it's not really a victory, but we're being told it's a victory. And I think next week it'll pay off. I think they will get off planet and they will leave, and we'll look back and say, oh, these precious moments were essential for them getting off the planet. But again, there's just a convenience in writing here. Like, he sent 2 stormtrooper battalions out to stop them, but he has an entire hangar of TIE fighters. Why not send out 10 TIE fighters to fight one singular Jedi shuttle and just strafe run this entire field? You're telling me that all of those TIE fighters would get shot down? You're telling me that wouldn't buy you even more time? There's just logic here that doesn't make sense. Like, if you're trying to buy time, why wouldn't you continually send small amounts of forces to keep them away with no real threat of losing them? I mean, I know we keep saying, oh, we're short on resources, but we see this battalion of stormtroopers kind of gets destroyed, and he's like, oh, those are acceptable losses. But I don't know, is 2 TIE fighters too much to ask? Like, is 3, 4, 5? Or is 5 TIE fighters going to bring the galaxy under your ruling fist. Like, it doesn't make sense. It's telling us that we just have to trust them and that the story makes sense. But logically, as an audience member, it kind of makes me feel like we're not being respected a bit. I don't know. This episode, I think, just did a lot of things the easy way. I think it is a far change from what we've gotten up to this point, writing-wise, quality-wise. I just think this was a step down and is really disappointing going into the finale week, where there's a lot that needs to be covered. I have a prediction that Thrawn gets out next week and our heroes either hitch a ride with him or they get stranded, because I don't know how else they would get back to the galaxy. Maybe there's a world between worlds on this planet and they access that and that's how they get back. I don't know. There's a lot up in the air. Baylon and Shin, I really hope have a nice finale next week, but this was a bummer because I was really excited on the trajectory we were going, and I don't think this was good enough for Thrawn. I think it was a good showcase of what he is, but I don't think the character reached its full potential here. And I think that's unfortunate. And again, I hope he gets bigger wins than just time. And for some people that might be cool, like, oh, he's so patient, he's so calculating, like just getting time back is a win for him. Like, he doesn't care about that. But again, you need those big wins, and he just hasn't had them. And there's some moments here where his tactics just don't really add up. I really think I could give him more time. I can give him a suggestion, like, yo, just carpet bomb like the people, like just do it really quick, like that'll slow him down. Don't worry about it. But yes, I think my rant is over. I am done talking about this episode. I did really enjoy some of the parts of this episode. I do like Ezra. I think Thrawn overall is being done serviceably well. I think other parts of it are fine, but not as good as they should be at this point in the season, which I don't think is a high expectation because we were building up momentum. The show was proving that it could be really great, and it shouldn't take a step down at this point in the show. So let me know your thoughts. Am I completely off base here? Did you guys absolutely love this episode? Did all of this stuff work for you? Do you think I'm overanalyzing it? Whatever you think, follow me on Instagram at @star_wars_mark of balance. Really appreciate the support. If you liked the episode or you didn't like the episode, if you've been listening and you don't agree with me, appreciate that. I think it's good to have multiple different opinions on things, and maybe I'll see it from a different perspective. So if you enjoyed this, give me a follow, give me a rate on whatever platform you're listening to. And yeah, thanks again for listening. As always, stay safe, stay healthy, and may the force be with you. Peace.